Our fourth session is titled Our Culture, Our Competitive Advantage. I would like to start by introducing my mentor and friend, Ala El-Hawagi. Ala serves as an organizational systems strategist, consultant, executive coach, and organizational development professional. He is the chairman of the board of Sterling International, headquartered in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and the former CEO of Innovative Group, headquartered in Pompano Beach, Florida. Hi, Ala, and thank you for joining me again today.
My pleasure, Dee. Thank you for having me.
As we continue with our series of organizational immunity, why don't we begin with you sharing with us what you mean by our culture, our competitive advantage?
Thank you. Before I answering this question, let me give our viewers who are joining us for the first time a very quick context. We started this series by focusing on the leadership, and we talked about how leaders lead through uncertainties. And there were some qualities, some styles, some requirements for leaders to keep an eye on while they are navigating those circumstances. Then we came to webinar 2 and we talked about how we can reinvent our business using the tool of the Canvas. And then on webinar number 3, we talked about the change management, which is how to go about applying what you need to apply and implement whatever you have in order to sustain your organization. Now we're getting into what, in my opinion, and the opinion of lots of researchers and organizational developers, to be the most competitive advantage for organizations today, which is the culture. So we're going to be talking about organizational culture today. I'm going to try to answer the question of how to build a culture, and more importantly, how to sustain that culture. There's no doubt that having a healthy, a strong, high performance culture is the way to go. In fact, it is not a subjective matter anymore. It's an objective and a strategic one. The question we always ask ourselves, if this is the case, and it's been proven by organizations who are doing it, it's been proven by researchers that have been looking at this for decades, why is it rare? Why we don't see more role model organizations that are culture-based, or as we call them, value-based organizations? Well, the reality of this is, or the quickest and simplest answer is, the word as a buzzword in the corporate world has lost most of its meaning because people talk about things but not necessarily apply those things. The second component here is culture is very dependent on the people operating, working, interacting, reacting to each other in that culture. And the fact is, when you get enough of us in the room and ask us to work together, problems will arise. What that means is managing those relationships, understanding the norms of the organizations and how to direct that in a calculated, business-like way is really what can get us to where we need to go with this. So in spite of all the talk about it, in spite of discussions about the topic, unfortunately, it's still a rarity in most organizations.
Okay, so there's some key points that I understand that you want to discuss with us.
Okay, well, in order to, there is a wonderful model that I'm going to share with our viewers today. But before I discuss this model, there are some key elements that we need to keep in the back of our minds. First of all, the foundation of having this to work is communication. So the foundation is communicate, communicate, communicate. In fact, I go as far as saying you need to develop a communication campaign. Use whatever social media you have. Use roll-ups, use posters, use segments in your staff meetings in order for you to be able to send the message very strongly and clearly. And here's the key: consistently. Here's the second point, or knowing that communication is the foundation. Here are the 5 points, in my opinion, that people need to keep in mind as they are attempting one to develop or to improve or to sustain whatever they improved when it comes to culture. Number one is develop the rich diversity of relationships. This is really a big piece. And it goes like this. Can we work together? Yes and no, and why? Do we have the right information at the right time, deliver the right way, so we can use it to deliver what we need? Number three, do I have the psychological safety to express myself openly and candidly at any given point? This is very critical, because if we are building a culture that is not open to receive feedback from people, well, guess what? Then it's going to be just a framework on a piece of paper. The second thing that I want people to keep an eye on is the idea of assumptions. Okay, assumptions become a mental model. When you assume something about anyone, that becomes your mental model. That becomes the way you see that person, the way you see that situation. And guess what? Mental model becomes your behaviors, and your behaviors become your outcomes and whatever you're going to do towards that person. So be very careful with assumptions. In fact, you really need to be focusing on, before you get into the assumptions, get into a dialogue, get into a conversation with the person, so you can clear up anything in your mind about the situation, about the people involved in that situation. I talked about this before, and I can't emphasize it enough. Every leader, every one of us, requires to have some sort of a board, some committee, a group of people. I used to call it support system. Now I'm calling it a board that you can go to, that you can consult with, that you can take their opinion on issues. People who believe in you, people who will be always there for you, people who will help you own your actions and see why accountability is very critical, people who will help you raise your awareness about issues, people who will institute the idea of rewarding achievements rather than time, and finally, people who are dedicated to share their knowledge, skills, and abilities to make you a better person. The fourth point would be share information. Increase information flow as the primary organizing force in the organization. People do much better when they get the information they need. And finally, building an effective culture, and I mentioned that before, it is not something that I will get to whenever I have time. So it is a strategic act. It needs to be part of the business plan for the organization. Each organization, we talked about that D before. As you're building your dashboard or new dashboard, you must put in that dashboard some sort of a meter to measure where your culture is and how is it doing.
Something I would like to bring up here also is the point about sharing information. Assumptions are probably the most toxic thing when you're trying to develop the culture, and how to eliminate those is by continuing to share information consistently and within a way that is going to be consistent across all channels and with all levels of the organization, because assumptions are also contagious. And if it starts with one, it just starts to run, and that's going to derail all your efforts. So I think it's really critical that what you're sharing here about making sure that we do have the right people who are developing the communication plan and making sure it's being executed correctly and effectively, so that they're also paying attention to when they do have to modify that plan. Just because they developed it and it looks great doesn't mean it's still effective. It has to be evaluated like everything else, any other process. But the assumptions are where you've got to be careful. And that's, people that are having to work at a distance, that's where assumptions can really come in, because they're not seeing these people, and the worst becomes the assumption. So you have to have regular communications and meetings and open dialogue for these people. It's important. Okay. I really like the visual aids you used in the last two webinars. so viewers can have a representation of what we're talking about, as well as it being a tool to begin their own reflection of the topics we're covering. What have you developed for us to help with understanding how to establish a high-performing culture?
Okay. Again, I'm going to make the same disclaimer that I make every time, Dee, which is this is a framework. This is a framework that a base that everybody can start from, but it is consolidating a lot of information. So use it, customize it, add to it, eliminate from it as you see fit. In this case, it's a complete framework and a model that I'm going to share with you. One of the things I mentioned in our previous webinars, as you already know, I never share things that we haven't used. So anything we talk about in our webinars or I talk about in our workshops are things that already been done. They've been done in our organization, they've been done with our clients, and they yield some fantastic results. So here we go. So let us put this up so we can share it with our viewers. All right. So I call this our culture, our competitive advantage, because indeed it is our competitive advantage once we build that healthy culture. So there's a lot of information, a lot of graphs, so people don't get lost. I will walk you through this. Let's start with the rectangular on the top, the gray one. It says bottom-up approach to achieve success. And these are three key points that the entire model is hinged on. Results pyramid model illustrates that the results we are getting in our organizations are achieved as a product of the actions people take. So whatever actions people take in any given organization create those results. Okay, they can be key performance indicators, they can be part of your business plan, whatever the case might be. Now, the actions people take are motivated by their own beliefs, by their own values, guided by the way they see the world, their mental models, okay? And those beliefs are created by their own experiences in life. So whatever you have gone through, professionally or personally, impact your mental model, impact your values, which is your beliefs, which impact your actions, and your actions impact the results. So let's go clockwise, by looking at the four white background boxes. So we begin here in the middle by talking about a definition of a culture. So let's begin by a definition of a culture, which is the small square on the top between the two color triangle. And it says that culture is the way people, employees, think and act. So we create norms in the organization. Some of these norms are documented, and those are the rules of the organization. Maybe delineated in clear and employee handbook, maybe in some sort of a memo. But there are unwritten norms, which are the traditions, okay? For example, one of the norms we have in corporate America is Friday is a dress down day. So people kind of know that when it comes Friday, they come a little bit more casual, dress code wise, to the workplace. That may not be written anywhere, but people know it. It is a norm that when you go to a meeting with a client to have a tie and a suit or a formal dress, that's a norm. It may not be written anywhere, but people know it. Now, the second white background box to the right of everyone, it says that experiences foster beliefs, and beliefs or values influence the way we act, and actions produce the result. So this is, in a way, is a much faster interpretation of that gray box on the top. Then we come to the small square in the middle at the bottom, which it says bottom up. When we look at the model, you're going to notice as we go bottom up, it's going to be much faster, it's going to be much more efficient, and more importantly, it's going to be something that can be sustained. Lastly, on the left-hand side, again, the white background rectangular, it says, in order for us to change the results, let's say that the results you receive in any organization is not what you are looking for, whether it's performance, whether it's culture-based, whatever the case might be. What do you need to do? Effective leaders need to create new experiences. Because remember, the experiences created those results. So we need to create those new experiences. Now you look in the picture in the model in the middle, which says experiences get to results, results get to actions, and actions get, experiences get to beliefs, beliefs get to actions, and actions get to results. So in order for us to get different results, we need to start thinking about creating new experiences. Those new experiences is going to start generating and reinforcing the desired culture beliefs. How do you envision your culture to be? What kind of values? Is honesty a good value for your organization? Is teamwork is an important value for your organization? How about integrity? How about transparency? Whatever the case might be. Then those beliefs will drive those new actions, and those new actions at the end will give you the new desired results. So let us look at those 4 quadrants, if you will, of this model, which again, experiences foster beliefs, beliefs influence actions, and actions produce results. So I prepared, this is, by the way, this model is based on the book by Roger Connors and Tom Smith titled It Changed the Culture, It Changed the Game. Highly recommended for leaders to have a position of this book in your library. Very simple to read, very straightforward, very businesslike, and it gets you to the point. So let me try to interpret those 4 terms in a way that are tangible to most of us. So let's begin with the term experience. Okay. Experience is not going to happen by leaving your office and start acting in a certain way. This requires planning. Okay. This planning needs to be given, provided, displayed to everybody in the organization. How are we going to about implementing that? How we're going to allow people to interpret that? One of the things that I always suggest to leaders, be present and live the now. Okay, you cannot be living in the past, you cannot be living in the future. How does your now look like? And how do you as a leader look in the now, look in the present? Okay, emphasize the important. I talked about that before. There are a lot of key points in your strategic plan. There are a lot of key points in your business plan. What are the few criticals? That's what you need to focus on. Get to know your people as people. Take those few minutes every day and spend it with people. Well, what about people now hunkered down in their homes, doing business from wherever because they can't get to the office because of what we are going through? Well, thank goodness to technology. Choose one person in your team and give that person a call. Okay, use any technology platform to connect with one person a day. 5 minutes. How are you doing? Okay, what's going on in your work? How are you adjusting? How are you dealing with whatever you're dealing with, etc. This is the fifth. The fourth one is, or the fifth one. This is very big, and I truly believe that this is the easiest way for leaders to display that experience. Walk the talk, okay? Lead by example. Tell the story. Make sure that when you tell the story, you share stories from people who have done things that support the experiences that you want everybody to see and look at and mimic in the culture. Now, once we've done that, we move into how this is going to foster the beliefs. Well, I believe we created a platform for people to see us as leaders, living in the present, walking the talk, telling the story of examples in the organization that actually are supporting the values that we're trying to get people to get in touch with, that to connect with. So the first thing is we need to ask ourselves, what beliefs, what values do we need to generate in order for those values to get the right actions we're looking for? What are those? How do they look like? What are some of the things that we need to be discussing in order to ensure that those beliefs are going to generate the right actions that we are looking for? What are our organizational values? As simple as that. You know, I walked into an organization one time, and I seen this person, you know, sitting in the front of the organization, wonderful person, and behind him on the wall, there is the vision, mission, and values of the organization. Very custom version. It looks absolutely beautiful, and it's like after I signed in and waiting for the person that I'm going to be meeting with, I said, "Excuse me, I noticed this behind you, and it looks absolutely wonderful. What is that?" And then she looks at me and she says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "That's behind you. That says, you know, vision, mission, values." She says, "I don't know. Someone came and put it the other day." And it's like, okay, well, yeah, we put the effort to put a custom version of it in every wall of the organization. What does it mean to people? Mm-hmm. How can they live it? She didn't know what that was to begin with. Okay, so make sure that those are vividly clear and fantastically communicated to everyone. Number three, do we live those values? Do we live those values? Another example that I walked into an organization one time, and it was actually a public agency here in Florida, and they had all these signs all over the lobby that says, "We live our values. This is the best county to live in." So the security guard, who is not employed by the county, by the way, was sitting in the lobby, and you know, standard procedure, you go and sign your name and so forth, and they take your picture. And I said, "Excuse me, what is that? Those signs that says we live our values?" He said, "Is this your first time here?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Okay, this is probably why." You see, we took the values of the organization, and here are the values, and we detailed those into behaviors, and we injected those into our performance evaluations, and we have a conversation about that on a weekly basis to see how we go about implementing these values. And I said, "Oh my God, this is exactly what I'm talking about." As simple as the security guard that meets you in the lobby, he is very aware of what living our values mean and how did this public agency was able to cascade down the understanding of the values to the front line so they can live it, so they can deal with it, so they can apply it, so they can use it to guide their own decisions and how they go about running their business every day. Now, if this is important to us, don't you think, Dee, that we need to find a way to reward folks in the organization for living those values?
Yeah.
I think if we're looking at it as a competitive advantage, what do we do with those who go beyond their KPIs, who have scored above their sales quota? Don't we give them bonus? Of course we do. Okay, so if culture is important to us, what are we doing to reward folks in that culture right there and then when they display the perfect implementation of one of our values in the organization? This is something that we need to really look at. the folks that work in compensation and benefits, they really need to be focusing on how can we promote our values through some sort of reward system that we agree on in the organization, and we announce that reward system. You don't keep it in the dark. And another thing which is really critical, how do we deal with handling values breakdown? What do we do with that employee in our team, in our organization, who doesn't live the values? What do we do with them? Do we turn our face the other way because they are responsible for bringing lots of profit to the organization? Do we coach that person on what's needed? Remember, it takes very small slippery slopes, those slippery slopes, very low, that decay your culture completely. And it's almost, you get to the point of no return. It's almost like you're going down and you're not seeing how subtle you are going down till you find yourself at the edge of a cliff and poof, it goes down. So watch those slippery slopes. Watch the folks that are breaking down the implementation and deployment of the values. I'm not suggesting that you need to fire these folks. In the contrary, I think this is when leaders become good coaches. This is when they become good mentors. This is when they take the time to explain once, twice, thrice. This is when you are showing the correlation between the implementation of these values and the progress of the organization and the profitability of the organization. Because if you are a culture-based organization that apply values, you're going to be entrusted by your customers, you're going to get repeat customers, and you're going to get repeat business. And that's a very big, this is a very big piece. That's why, with no doubt, I am convinced that culture is the competitive advantage of every organization. Now, let's see the transition between beliefs and actions, which, as I said, beliefs influence actions. Our values, what we believe and what we go by, is going to influence the way we make decisions, is going to influence the way we act with one another, interact with one another. So some of the questions we need to reflect on under that is, how do we translate our purpose and values? I really trust that this is one of the items that need to be an item in your agenda for any meeting. This needs to be a permanent item in every meeting that takes place in the organization. Why are we here? How are we going to get there? Purpose, values. Okay. Do we hold ourselves accountable for living those values? Begin with yourself as a leader, because you are under the microscope day in and day out by your team. They're not going to come and say, boss, you goofed. They're not going to come and say, why did you do this? But they take mental note of how you behave. And if that's how you behave, you are setting the stage for others to say, it is okay to behave this way. So the first thing we need to do as leaders is to say to ourselves, are we behaving consistently with our values? Okay, that's where your board comes handy. Talk with your board. How do you see me act? Talk with your team. Make it a point of discussion. Make it a way where we all hold each other accountable, where we all share with each other our views of how we are living these values. It is so important that we hold ourselves first accountable before we hold others. Okay? You cannot preach what's right unless you are doing what's right. The second question I would probably pose here is, or the third question rather, I don't know what's my issue with numbers today. What?
You can practice later.
I'll read numbers, I guess. Okay. What are specifics to bring our culture, how we can get our culture to life? This is where your creativity, ingenuity, come up with ideas that are fun, that are fresh, that are crisp, And hey, by the way, you don't have to come up with these ideas as a leader. Talk about it in your meetings. And you may be flooded with some fantastic thoughts from your team members that actually going to help. And you know, when you engage your team in coming up with these, guess what? They're going to support it and they're going to live it. So you're kind of killing two birds with the same stone. Are our customers involved? You know, several organizations, by the way, they involve their customers, okay, in the makeup of their values, and they listen to their customers about how are we doing implementing our values. Okay, this is so important because your customers bring in the resources to the organization. So want to keep and duplicate. In order to keep and duplicate, you really need to engage them. You really need to engage them even in the making of those values. Here's what we're thinking we need to live by. How would that serve you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer? And listen to what they need to say. Do the current accountabilities lead to current situations that we don't like? And if that's the case, how can we reverse it? Okay, how can we reverse this? And here's a very simple way of building accountability in the organization. You don't even need a consultant to do that. Accountable questions is about the questions we ask ourselves. Okay, self-talk, as Dr. Daniel Goleman talked about it in emotional intelligence. So all accountable questions begin with what or how. Three components to the accountable questions. How accountable am I? All accountable questions begin with what or how. They include an I and they have an action verb. So instead of pointing the fingers at someone, the question will sound like, how can I do this? What can I deploy with what I got? As we're pointing to ourselves, this is the first step, okay, to get into the personal accountability that we're looking at. How can I translate these values? What can I do to display these values to my team members and so forth? Now actions, we believe that actions produce results. What organizations do every day, people in the organizations, they do work, they take actions, they make decisions. All this will lead to the eventual results, either on the day or next week or next year and so forth. So on the results, how can we define the R collectively? It's not the leader sitting in his office. You remember when we talked about the command center? And I said, yeah, well, the strategic apex can have a little bit of time to figure out their strategic objectives and what needs to be done, but they have to go to the command center that's made of the different layers of the organizations and the different functions of the organization in order to collectively define what results do we want to see in our organization. So don't do it alone in a room, you do it collectively with the folks. How do we cascade the new results that we need organizationally? Okay, actions and behaviors, what's involved in there? Do we need results for accountability? Okay, do we need to have accountability matrix and review that matrix? Let me help you with the answer. Absolutely, absolutely. And that needs to be revisited. I'm not going to say on daily basis, but at least on weekly basis. How are we doing with accountabilities in our organization? And across the board, by the way, no one is exempted. Starting with the leader, not starting at the bottom, starting with the leader. Does the leader live those values? Listen, I worked with clients that literally has gyms in their organization, literally. And the bust, unfortunately, comes sometimes from the leader. They display what's needed, they craft what's needed, but they don't live it. And this is the biggest challenge we see sometimes in culture. It is not monitored, and it is not displayed well by the person in charge. It got to start there, okay? So accountability when it comes to the results of our actions, beliefs, and experiences is very critical. Creating the continuous desire. We really need to continuously answering the WIFMA question to people. What's in it for me? Why do we need to be a value-based organization? Why do we need to be a culture-based organization? Remember, it may be clear in your head as a leader, but not necessarily in the heads and the hearts and the minds of everyone in the organization. Your role as a leader is to connect with the folks and explain that vividly clear. What's in it for you when we all collectively are living those values? And finally, when everything is said and done, and we have achieved the results for our culture that we're looking for, we ought to celebrate, okay? What gets measured gets done, what gets reinforced gets done, and what gets celebrated, it gets anchored. So we celebrate. It's like those 10, 15 minutes in a given day, in a given week, in the organization where we're going to have festivities, and we're going to call these festivities celebrating our values, celebrating our organization, living those values. Make this visible, make this tangible, make this touched by every soul in the organization. I trust by doing that, people will understand the criticality, the importance, the value of applying the values. That's in a very nutshell is the model. It is wonderful. It does work. It does provide what's needed. It just comes down to how serious are we about implementing it.
This made me think of, do you remember how, I don't know, forever it seemed like it was the code that the belief that the customer was always right, no matter what. And when I'm looking at this and remembering that that impacts the culture negatively. And I think if we stopped saying that the customer is always right and consider interactions with customers to be a win-win situation, can you speak to that where the employees feel supported because they've been given the autonomy to make decisions that will help assist the customers and satisfy their needs, but without losing some of themselves along the way, where they can also feel like they're living true to holding up what's right for the company, but then they're also doing what's best for the customer as well. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. I trust you are speaking to how autonomous and engaged is the workforce.
Yeah.
You know, I really, this is touching beautifully what we are talking about here, which goes like this. If we have established the values of the organization, which are the guidelines of how everybody needs to operate, if we have provided the vision of where this organization is going, if we have embedded all this in how we interact with one another and how we work with one another every day, then in a way, and obviously, we provide the knowledge, skills, and abilities for our folks to know how to manage these situations. I trust we are doing a lot more than just creating customer experience. I trust that we are giving our folks the ability to do what's right all the time and to create that balance between the customer need as well as the organizational need, including, by the way, taking a moment to educate our customers on our values and why we do what we do, and also educate them on our services and why we do what we do. Having this ability to do that, it speaks greatly to how you have set the tone in your organization and what kind of values you have provided your folks to work with in order to support the customers. All my life, as I was holding leadership positions in different organizations, and I will get sometimes a call from my manager, and he or she will ask about where is employee X? And my answer is always, I have no clue, but I hope that you're doing something great. You did not pay me to become the police on where people are. Mm-hmm. Okay, why? Because they are professionals. They've been well trained. They've been well coached. They know how to ask when they are in need of an answer. And they know exactly the values that we are abide by. So just go and get busy and do what you need to do. Mm-hmm. At Sterling International, do I need to know what everybody is doing every single day? I hope not. I have no clue what everybody is doing, but they're doing amazing things, including why we're both on air. I never thought that is a possibility, but they created that. And they said, oh, by the way, you're going to show up on this day and you're going to talk about this. This is really amazing when you really tap into people's ingenuity and allow them to get you the good stuff they are holding in their hearts and in their minds.
Yeah. And I think
your question.
You did. I just want to emphasize that allowing to empower the employees, it also gives them that feeling that they are supported by the organization, that it allows them to give the customer experience that the organization is asking to give, but it's also making that employee feel that they're supported, because not all transactions with customers go as smoothly as we'd hope, but that helps them also feel that they followed their coaching that they've received with how to address these customers and what they can do. And most of the time they end up with a win-win situation for the organization as well as for the customer. So it's just important to always make sure that your employees are feeling supported and given the authority to make appropriate decisions. And I think that's a big part of that'll continue to grow the culture. It does a lot to support that workforce.
Absolutely.
What would be some of the tools that can be used to cascade this now successfully?
Well, I can speak to 3 simple tools, very, very simple. They are known to every leader. We have used them over decades and we've been very successful with them, okay? And they are all come under the term focused. So the first one would be focused feedback. How can I provide a focused feedback to folks when it comes to their actions and values, implementation of values? We need to build a mechanism, and we have wonderful feedback models that we'll be very willing to share with anyone who asks about it. But what are some of the things that we can use in order to provide that focused feedback on when people are doing the right thing and when people need to be coached on doing the right thing? Okay. The second one is, which I encourage everybody to do, people connect with stories. Tell the stories, but you need to tell a focused story, okay, that it will help people in the organization to live that story and mimic it themselves in the culture of the organization. I have never known that you can get a certification in storytelling. Oh my God, I discovered this, and I'm looking at it. There is a certification on how to tell a story, and it takes you on some of the key components of how to tell the story, but you don't have to take the certification. Every one of us tells a story every day, but just make sure that these stories are focused and that are focused on someone who lived that value and why that was important and how that led into a success in the organization. The last one is, you remember what I call the power of anchoring the values, which is a focus recognition tool. And I'm not talking about throwing money at people because they live the values. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about take the moment to say, thank you for living the value of transparency. I really appreciate you coming to me and pointing to me my own fallacies that I need to work on in order to become the leader that you deserve. So having that focus recognition tool for people living your values become very critical, which takes me to a very, very critical point. very critical point. In order to lift these values off the walls of the organization and off the documents of the organization, please develop KPIs for him, key behavior indicators, help people live those values. How many of us got into a performance dialogue session, evaluation, whatever you call it in your organization, and I am almost certain that most performance evaluations has a part about values. What do you do with that? Okay, how would you give someone 80% on integrity? How would you give someone exceed in honesty? How did you come up to that conclusion? And there is always an argument about that. When you have key behavior indicators that have been agreed upon at the beginning of the year, quarter, or whatever, it's a matter of, did I live those or not? So I lived 4 out of 5, I'm 80%. If I lived 6 out of 5, 6 out of 10, I'm 60%, and so forth. So those are 3 tools, not to complicate things. Focused feedback tool, focused storytelling tool, and focus recognition tool. I trust these are very simple tools that have been used over time, and if they are used effectively, they will get us to where we need to go.
Okay, what's the role of the leader in the culture transformation efforts?
You know, I have been known to be very unforgiving when it comes to leaders, because leaders are the keepers of the culture. Leaders are the keepers of the culture. If leaders do not behave and act in a way that is consistent with the values of the organization, forget about everything you ever heard from me. Mm-hmm. Forget it completely. It's not going to happen. Okay? So remember 3 things. Leaders need 3 skills, actually. The first one is how to lead a change. The second one is how to respond to feedback. And the third one is to be facilitating whatever you need to facilitate. You need to master those 3 skills. But above all, remember that you are the keeper of the culture, or lack of. You can jeopardize the entire culture by the way you behave and how people look at the way you behave.
Okay, well, what are some of the considerations to keep in mind during the deployment efforts?
Well, it's, I always say this, let me begin with number 1 that I just finished talking about. Because leaders are the keepers of the culture, we need to begin at the top. You really need to begin at the top of your organization and say, do our leaders provide the needed experiences that can foster the beliefs, that can create the actions, that can create the results? That's number 1. Accountability is a big piece. Who do I hold accountable? Starting from the top person in the organization all the way to the front line. No one is exempt. No one gets a free pass on this. Number 3, establish a process control. Establish a way to monitor this, to make absolutely sure that you got the pulse of the organization, so you can intervene at the right time before it's too late, because it takes a lot of time to build a culture, and it takes almost no time to break it down by continuity of those slippery slopes. Mm-hmm. Number 4, culture is communication, and communication is culture, which I said is the foundation to begin with before I even talked about the model. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Which means, and we know that, this is really a big piece. You cannot not communicate. We are communicating all the time. Over 80% of our communication depends on our gesture, posture, our eye contact, and what we do. Mm-hmm. It's not the words that come out of our mouth. Only 20% are the words you say. Watch how you walk. Watch how you talk. Watch how you connect. Watch your body position when you talk with people. Watch your eyes. Watch your face. Watch how you connect with others, because you are in communication all the time. 2 points for awareness. Get people ready for a change and always be ready to answer what's in it for them. And design for maximum engagement and ingenuity. Design. If you're going to design this, design it for the max. Don't design it for halfway. Those are kind of considerations to keep as you're going through this.
Yes, something for me that's a very, very big piece is the accountability at all levels, particularly with top management. I think that's really critical. And that also reinforces what we've been talking about today regarding the culture.
Okay, very good.
Okay, now that we've got, I'm sorry?
And I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that.
Okay, we have a few minutes left here to wrap things up. So if you don't mind, could you quickly summarize the key points from today's webinar?
Okay. Again, I wanna share with our viewers that the title of the book, which is not my book, but I love the book, Change the Culture, Change the Game. Culture is a competitive advantage, and if we don't deal with it as such, I don't trust that we're going to be able to sustain our organizations in the long term. So building an effective culture is not subjective. Rather, it's a strategic act. So make it part of your strategic plan, make it part of your business plan, make it part of your operations by talking about it in your meetings, make it a part of one-on-one dialogues every day. As you mingle with your team members, as you mingle with another team, as you mingle with another leader in the organization, make this part of what you do every day. Mm-hmm. Begin with self. It doesn't matter where you are in the organization, on the top, the middle, or the front line. Always look at yourself and begin with yourself. Did I formalize my board, the committee, the support system that I can, the go-to people that I can ask when I'm in need of an answer or I am in a bind? Make absolutely sure in this context that you adopt a clear and effective communication. We are living in a very complex world. Not because you had a workshop about communication or because you are teaching communication or because you know about communication or read a book about communication. It means that you are a good communicator. Communication is one of those that we need to consistently be working on it. So validate understanding of the other person. Make absolutely sure that you address what you address in multiple ways so the message is clear and make sure that is understood. My third point, as a summary, the culture is your competitive advantage. So start with creating new experiences. What new experiences can we discuss in our command center right now that will allow us to start a new leaf in our organization or improve whatever we have or build on whatever we have, whatever the case might be. But creating the new experiences will always lead you to the new results. My fourth point are the tools that you have asked about, the focused feedback and focused storytelling and focused recognition to anchor those values. And finally, leaders are the keepers of the culture. So my message to the leaders viewing our webinar today, please act accordingly. I think this is, in the most part, the key points that we covered to support the model that we've shared today.
Okay, terrific. Okay, I'd just like to thank everyone who has reached out to us today through the Organizational Immunity Resort. And I'm encouraging all businesses to continue to reach out to us at my.community@sterlinginternational.com. Thank you, Ala, and thank you to everyone joining us today. We will see you next Saturday at 12:30 p.m. Cairo local time for the final session in our 5-part webinar series. See you then. Thank you.
Thank you.